So I recently saw Alien Romulus in theaters because that marketing had a hold on me tighter than a facehugger that was freshly latched. And so I had to see it. And with seeing movies, a lot of people think that if you critique a movie or pick it apart that you actually don't enjoy it, but I'm quite the opposite. I actually love picking apart movies, stories, all that kind of stuff because it helps me enjoy it more. And I know that may not make sense, but that's just how I enjoy movies. So, with that being said, you can call me Astro, and I have no degrees, educations, certifications, really anything. I'm just a dude who goblin rants on the internet. And I am going to hand you the motion tracker to my thoughts and my opinions, and we're going to navigate this together about a movie that I think that you would benefit from watching. I'll start with a non-spoiler version of this. Do I think you should see this movie? Well, I saw it in IMAX because I was able to splurge because I had a gift card, and I think it lends very well to the sound and set design. So I would say see it in IMAX if you're able to, but if you can wait for streaming, I think it's also a good thing on streaming as well. It has a lot of really wonderful looking set pieces when it's properly lit. And the sound stages are awesome, minus the very loud sounds that they'll play during jump scares, which I'm not a huge fan of. But I think the story in concept is really good and straightforward, but it just has a lot of potential that I think was lost. I have a lot of critiques and a lot of praises for what this movie has like accomplished, but you can definitely tell that it was a labor of love. So the people who made this movie actually really cared about every little detail that they were doing, and I find that I really appreciate those aspects, even if the story isn't very strong. So, from this point forward, I'm going to be spoiling this movie like a chest burster at dinner with friends. So you are warned right now that if you want to watch this without spoilers, by all means, stop this video right now. And please make sure you come back. I'm going to start by saying that I understand a lot of reviews say that this is a must watch and a return to form in terms of horror, but I don't think that it is. There was a lot of subtlety in alien horror. Like the first movie, there was a lot of subtlety to this horror, and it didn't rely on very loud jump scares or sounds or anything like that. So I don't think it's a return to form when it comes to that. I'm, again, like I said before, I'm not a fan of very loud sounds and then showing something like a jump cut. I don't think that does very well. And the other thing that like I don't think it did very well is it doesn't return to like the really gory deaths that you would see in a lot of horror movies. All of the deaths are pretty much for me forgettable, minus one that I thought was really cool. But the very end of the movie, which is going to be super divisive and is and has been from what I have seen with a lot of people, including myself, just leans very hard into Uncanny Valley. And for me, it falls flatter than a Vickers unable to make a sharp 90-degree turn. Like it just did not land well for me. I feel like if they could have just cut that bit out of the movie, and it would have been for me a win across the board minus some critiques. So, if I had to summarize the plot, it would be a heist movie that, was gone wrong. It's about a ragtag group of friends who are trying to escape the weight of working under Wayland Yutani for pretty much the rest of their lives, mining and dying like their parents. They're trying to steal cryopods from this space station, Wayland Yutani space station, that's floating in orbit, that for some reason they've only recognized outside of everybody else on the planet. So that I found was a little weird. However, things go wrong when they try and go retrieve the pods because, they pull it out and then facehuggers were being kept frozen, like in plastic wrap shells things. And now that I kind of think about it, that's really weird because like obviously they know not the characters, but the space station would know how like volatile those facehuggers are. And so just to keep them in like a sealed room with plastic wraps wrapped around them and not like in a security cage thing to immediately like prevent them from like running around or escaping okay, I'm getting I'm getting a little too far in the weeds about that. I'm sorry. I'm getting lost in that. Anyways, okay, just to summarize it, one person gets face hug, there's a chest burster, Andy becomes Rook. Rook is evil to a degree. Black goo. Multiple people die, and again, the most divisive divisive end that I've ever seen. Throughout the runtime, the characters have like no real development and don't give you any reason to actually be attached to them aside from Andy, who is actually synthetic. I think he's the only relatable character in the story. There isn't much to each character other than them waiting to die in like unique or graphic ways, which again doesn't really happen minus one character. which is unfortunate because I think that the actors do a pretty good job with those characters. They're just unfinished characters. Alien and Aliens had pretty spectacular character development, and at the very least, you cared about the characters in those movies. You cared about their motivations and things that happened to them, even if you didn't like them, even if they were evil characters, you still cared about them. And as unfortunate it is for me to say right now, I really feel like Alien Resurrection had more likable and relatable characters than this movie, even though it was way more campy than this movie was. Because this movie really isn't campy at all, which I enjoy about it. But the biggest thing to take me out of any movie is the constant references to other movies. Like, I don't mind subtle things in the background. Like, I think that those contribute to world building. And I think those are actually really cool things to have, things that aren't like drawn attention to. It does create meaningful world building because it connects them all together, even in the most inane things. Where this movie absolutely hits the target like an N56 smart gun are the drinking bird, the instances of Ripley's shoes, even though, yes, I know there's a product placement when it comes to the Reeboks or to zoom in, which is kind of laughable when you think about it, and the hairstyles that some of the characters had were references to Ripley's hair in some of the previous movies. There's also a bar sign that like is in the background, like no one really pays attention to it, but it's a reference to Aliens because they actually had the same sign in the background of their movie. These things don't take away from a movie, in my opinion, because they seemed like believable things that would just naturally occur in that universe. This movie, though, absolutely whiffs in the constant references to other movies in the franchise. Like, they are less than homages and more along the lines of like, hey, remember this thing? Remember this thing? Remember this thing happened? And they're nostalgic moments that often feel inorganic in the universe because they're trying to generate the same feeling that you had when you watched those previous entries in this series and franchise. So it really takes you out of the way. And a lot of people like viewing this movie like make the argument that there are only like 4 really main references in the movie, and I would have to disagree. If you are a long time enjoyer of this franchise, you're going to notice that there are a lot of subtle nods, which again, I'm in supportive of so long as it makes sense and it contributes to world building. Like, I'm fully supportive of those things. And I think here it having those constant references ends up hurting it because you end up spending more time like looking for Easter eggs versus actually journeying with the characters to enjoy the movie. I wanted to address the more egregious examples, which I think there are like 3 in my opinion that are super egregious. And instead of just being like, this is bad, I don't like this, like a lot of reviewers I've seen, I want to kind of give my opinion onto why I think that they're not that great. So, journey with me as we go down this road. Hopefully my opinions make sense to you because, sometimes like they just don't to me. Andy, an artificial person, says the famous line, "Stay away from her," that Ripley said in Aliens when facing the Queen on a semi-equal basis when she was in the power loader. This line, while being superbly badass, was fitting to the moment and had so much weight because it demonstrated the maternal bond she had developed with Newt, who was a surrogate to her own daughter that she lost in the 50 years that she was floating in space. It juxtaposed 2 maternal beings, one of which lost the entirety of their children and is seeking revenge, aka the Alien Queen, and the other one who is trying to protect that which they regained fighting for the daughter, aka Ripley. It was protective, it was personal, it was aggressive, and it was appropriate for the scene. It called attention away from Newt and started this epic fight between the two. When Andy did it, he had technically the upper hand already, and at no point did he really display this capacity to use profanity in such a way or insults in such a way. Now, a lot of people make the argument that one of the characters made insults at him using that word and terminology, but to me, it doesn't make sense. At least if he was going to use that word, what they could have done was just had him write in the script where he's asking Rain, his surrogate sister, hey, like, what does this word mean? And then him use it incorrectly multiple times. I didn't hear the audible cheering that one would expect when he delivered this line, except I heard a lot of groans and people going like, really? Because it just didn't make sense for the character. I really would have preferred if he gave a horrible dad joke when he did that or made a really bad pun. I think it would have hit better if he said, I must do what is best for Rain. Like, that is his mission objective or whatever you want to call it. I think that would have been really good. Another one is Rook. And holy mother 6000, did they make it difficult to watch this movie because they put him in this movie. They, for what I can surmise as nostalgia bait or trying to give homage to Ian Holm, because I know Fede Alvarez said that the character Ash doesn't get referenced a lot after the first Alien movie. And I also understand that he did do it respectfully by reaching out to the family and asking their permission to use this likeness. And I respect that so much. But when I tell you that this looked absolutely jarring, I mean it. Like, it doesn't look particularly good. And contrary to a lot of news sources who say that this is just a cameo, no, he is predominantly in the movie throughout the runtime. And whether it's moments of like extreme duress or fear or anything like that, when he pops up on screen, it is very distracting and it takes me out of the moment because it's like, oh, that doesn't look good. And I know they tried to hide it with like screens and stuff like that through the mirror, but at the same time, again, it just doesn't look right. It doesn't land well. I wish that they would have committed to the fact that Andy's upgrade, where Andy pulled out the chip from Rook's head and put it inside of Andy, I wish they would have committed to the fact that he slowly became Rook and slowly took over that role of menacingness and all of that jazz. I think that would have been a really, really cool like aspect. Or at the very least, they kept Rook just on the monitors to have conversations. The other thing is he delivered Ash's line, which again pulls you out of the moment, and I don't think that it was really well done. I think it was more like, oh, look at this thing, look at this, he said the thing, and I just don't like it. The other reference, and I actually know that this wasn't intentional because there was an article where Fede Alvarez said that he went to the movies with his son to see the premiere, and his son was like, that ending was just like Alien Resurrection, and he said that he never thought about that. I'm going to be spoiling the very end right now, so if again, turn back if you don't want to know it, but here it is. The ending I absolutely did not like. I think that introducing this engineer human hybrid who is completely an alien hybrid who is completely pale and pasty reminded me too much of the xenomorph that the Queen xenomorph gave birth to in Alien Resurrection. I also had a lot more questions, like how did it grow so fast? How did it know to do all the things that it was doing? Why on earth did it really even look like an engineer? Why out of the womb was it like an ovomorph egg? Why was it filled with acid? Wouldn't that have like eaten away at it? Like there were so many questions. How does it like obey the laws of physics with like its growth patterns and all kinds of stuff? Like there was too many questions there that took me out of it, and I was just kind of waiting for the ending to be over. The most unfortunate part for me in all of it really is I just kept thinking about Alien Resurrection, which again pulled me out of that moment, pulled me out of all the creepiness, pulled me out of everything because although I don't like a lot about Alien Resurrection, the way that they handled that ending for me was actually pretty interesting. It was unique enough for me to be like, okay, well, that's an interesting way to look at it. All right, so those are my biggest ones. Now we're going to kind of I'm going to be rapid firing the next ones in no particular order, like good critiques, bad critiques, all that kind of jazz. And they're just going to be mixed up in the middle. So, buckle up, here we go. I think the entry scene where they're going into the space station was awesome. I think that it was claustrophobic and all kinds of perfect and set up so many things to be paid off later, and it never got used again. Like they're crawling through this thing, and one can make the argument that that's like crawling into a womb where all the other aliens are and to be born, like blah, 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 blah. You can make that argument if you wanted to, but I wish that they would have used that aspect a lot more than just that one scene to get into it, because it really set a good tone. But again, they never used it. They really glazed over the black goo synthesis. It left me with so many more questions. Like, how did they get all of that from Big Chap, who was floating out in space? How were they able to synthesize it without like the acid blood tearing through everything? How did they do any of that? Like, how did they know that that's where it was? Like, it's just so many things to me. Speaking of Big Chap, and if you don't know, Big Chap is the nickname that they given to the original xenomorph in Alien. I can suspend my disbelief for a lot of things. But them Weyland Yutani being able to find Big Chap floating out in space for 20 years is a lot to me. I feel like that is way too much for me to suspend my disbelief. And also, like, it's a cool homage. Like, he had the harpoon in his shoulder, but that, like, he has acid blood. So what kind of material was that harpoon made of where it didn't, like, melt or anything like that? To me, I wish that they would have gone with the angle where they found LV-246, which would have set up aliens and the colony there and grabbed ovomorphs there and like basically reverse engineered those. Because when you get to the point in the movie where they talk about how Rook says he reverse engineered the DNA from Big Chap and all of that stuff, it's really confusing because how did he know to make the face hugger? How did he know that that was a part of the line of their gestation process? And like, how did they know that? How did they get to that point? Like, what gave them the clue that that was where this was supposed to be? Like, it's really confusing when you actually sit back and think about it. I wish they would have leaned more heavily into that. Like facehuggers aren't usually that aggressive, but I can get past that because they were synthesized from the black goo. But then again, you go back to like, how did they know to synthesize those specific creatures from the black goo? Like, how did they know? Like, I don't understand that part. I would have loved if the first half of this movie really focus on the aspect of what happened at the space station, or even like the first 20, 30 minutes. I would have been okay with that. I think that it would have been awesome. I do think it's funny though that when you get to the science lab, they have face huggers in there and like the liquid, and it looks like lobsters at a grocery store when they used to have them with the rubber bands. I don't know if they still do. I haven't seen them in a while, but it reminded me of that, and I thought it was funny. I didn't mind so much the gestation period for chestbusters because again, this is the rapid assimilation of the black goo. However, it's really confusing because it pulls from like genetic material, like actual biomaterial, whatever you want to call it. And to be able to generate a being that quickly, one, it would probably kill the host because you're pulling so much material from a person. And two, like why did that person not burst into flames? Again, I can just suspend disbelief, but the metabolic processes to go through that would generate so much energy that that person would probably melt. So, like, again, I think it's interesting that the black goo could like gestate quicker. I can get in on board with that in that universe, but the biology aspect is too confusing for me. On that same notion, the scene where it bursts out of its chest and you actually see like the thing that it cocoons itself in with Bjorn, and I had to look up that character's name because I could not remember it. I think it's an interesting aspect, but again, we go back to how did it develop so quickly without, burning up its entire metabolism? How did it do all of the things it's doing? You're telling me that it burst out of the chest, shed, and then had enough time to make a cocoon and gestate and all that stuff, like, and then be electrocuted by Bjorn, which by the way, Bjorn, his death is probably my favorite death out of the entire movie. It was the most interesting. It was really cool. It leaned very well in body horror. I think it was great. Speaking of that xenomorph that was specifically born out of Navarro, again, had to look up that character's name because I hate that they're so forgettable. I wanted to remember them. When it catches Rain in the elevator shaft, one, its tails are made of spines, and that probably would have at least broken her back or her ribs, no matter how gently he caught her. And two, it has like this damage from where Bjorn like electrocuted it. And when you're watching the scene, when it's like screaming in her face, I thought it was really cool. It's obviously trailer bait, but it has electricity come out of that like little hole, which for me bothers me because that's where all of its vital organs are. And so why is it having the electricity come out? What does that mean? Like, I don't know. And then you're like, oh, why did we catch it? Because it has this whole moment where it's like, oh my gosh, what are we? When he pulls like her closer to his face, only to realize that a face hugger is coming her way, which sparked a line of questioning in my head, which is how do the adult xenomorphs in this area, like in this story, communicate with the face huggers? Like, how do they know to work together? That's one of the things I liked about the Queen in Aliens because you could see she was actively communicating with the face huggers or the overmorphs, the face huggers, and the actual drones, whether it's telepathically or with pheromones. You can see that they back off when she looks at them, and the overmorph opens up when Ripley's trying to leave. So how did they know to work together? How, like, what is the thought process of all that? Like, I needed a little bit more. The pulse rifle scene was pretty cool and an interesting scene, but you're telling me that the Colonial Marines and aliens didn't have access to this technology. I feel like that was a huge whiff in a lot of ways. The scene where Tyler, and again, I had to look up his name, shows Rain how to use it, and his whole thing is like, well, I play video games. That I hate that reasoning for a lot of stuff when it comes to using weapons and things like that. And I know it's supposed to mirror the scene Ripley are using, where he's teaching her how to do all stuff with pulse rifle, but their scene was warranted and earned. because of the relationship they had built going up to it. We just had the assumption that these Rain and Tyler were in a relationship based off of pictures. The other thing is, how did it know what to specifically auto target when they were shooting it? Like, I get you can see it on a little thing, but how did it know what the person wanted to shoot? Like, I know this is like too far in the weeds, but I like asking these questions because I want to know the technology, because I want that world to be expanded. And I thought it was a really cool scene, especially with the acid blood when you see it twirling in zero gravity. But you're telling me, even though that's freaking cool, not a single drop of that blood hit anywhere, like hit any of the external parts or any other hallways, just that railing. Like, I get it. You have to suspend disbelief and things like that, which I can totally do. But if you're shooting a xenomorph who has acid blood and the round is causing it to explode, chunks to blow off of it, that, regardless of being in zero gravity, it's going to be in motion. It's going to continue in motion and not like circled. Like, I don't understand the circling part. The other thing that kind of bothered me towards the end, and again, I'm rapid firing stuff, so these are going to be like one-off sentences, is why did the engineer alien hybrid have to suck blood? Like, what was the deal with that? Like, why was its tongue so long? I mean, the aliens, the xenomorphs, their heads are so large because they have to harbor harbor that tongue and like that projectile mouth. They have to harbor that in that large head. So where was the hybrid? Like, why was his tongue so long? Why did it needed to suck blood and fluid? Another thing that I was trying to like really wrap my head around story wise is Rain did save Andy, and I think that that's great. I think that it lends well to showing like the relationship, and she wasn't going to give up on him, and she cared for him because he was the only person there for her. He is a remnant of her father who loved her enough to have this synthetic person be repaired and have all these dad jokes and puns and things like that to tell her when she's scared. I think that's great. However, one of the purposes of him was to be able to pilot the ship that they were riding 9 light years away, I believe it is, if I remember off the top of my head, to ensure they get safely to a planet that is outside of Weyland-Yutani's control, where he's not allowed to be at. So that's interesting. But she goes back and saves him. In the end, Andy gets like sliced by the hybrid, so he's pretty much out of commission. She takes him and puts him in a cryopod and says, "I'm going to fix you." And then does like the thing that Ripley does at the end of Alien, where she's like, this is what happened, this is where we're going. But doesn't, like, I don't understand how she's going to get there if they needed Andy to navigate to that planet. How the heck is she going to get there? Is she going to wake up periodically? How is that going to work? What, again, it lends so many questions that don't really make sense because they don't have a good, solid answer to them. It's just like suspend your disbelief and see, this is a homage, this is a callback to the first movie. And this is the kind of stuff I was talking about earlier. I don't mind subtle hints and homages and things like that, but when they take you out of a believable portion of the movie and the story, it just doesn't work. And I don't think that ending works at all, because at the very end of it, she still had the black goo, so she could have used that as a bargaining chip with Weyland-Yutani. She could have jettisoned the black goo from her ship. She could have landed back on the planet they were on, repaired Andy, and then took off, having all of the things already on her ship, knowing that Weyland-Yutani was a while still from getting to the planet in order to retrieve those things. That was one of the main story points. Nope, she just, rockets off into space. And I get riding out into the proverbial sunset, but I don't feel like that was a very good choice or wise choice for this person and the story. I know I'm like getting a lot in the weeds and nitpicking. I actually really do think that this movie had a lot going for it, and I think it's an enjoyable watch. I think it does a really good job of keeping you on the edge. And again, the set designs are amazing. However, I think that there are a lot of glaring story issues that people have been pointing out, some way more aggressively than I have, but I don't think that it is a dumpster fire like a lot of people say. I don't think that it is. I think that it is a very good self-contained story, and I think, unfortunately, if I had to give my opinion more, I think Ridley Scott wanted this movie to circumvent the Queen because he never really liked the Queen. He never liked that concept. So I really think that this is his way of, even though he didn't direct it, he was a producer and had influence on it. I think that this is his way of circumventing that storyline and making his own thing. All right. that's all I have for you. This is my first time really ever doing anything like this. So if you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you think that I could break down other movies or want to hear me ramble into the endless nothingness of the internet about rambling about other things, please leave a comment. Let me know. Movies, shows, whatever, just let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can get to break down any of those things. With that being said, again, thank you for watching and I'll see ya.